There's really nothing like sitting back and relaxing, enjoying a deck that you built in your own backyard. Today I'm going to show you how to put together a simple platform deck that anyone can build themselves. So you've selected your location you want to build your deck in. The next step is to level the surface. I've spread out about 10 bags of sand, just gives us something to move around to level the area, and what we'll be using is a good old-fashioned rake. Once you've got a reasonably flat surface, the next step to do is compaction. What we'll be using is a hand tamper. It's perfect for small scale projects like this and allows you to compact that soil down, just get a nice solid base for your deck to be built on. Once we've finished compacting the area, the next step is to think about drainage. We're going to do that with some weed matting and some drainage gravel. Now that we have the drainage sorted under our deck, the next thing to talk about is how we're going to keep it level. That's where these little pedestal feet come into play. They're completely adjustable, and this one adjusts from 30mm right up to 60mm, and it's going to account for any deviations over our 3-metre deck. Simply adjust them and away you go. We'll start joining our frame together now, so pre-drill 2 holes for each corner and join that corner together with 2 large bugle screws. Now that you've got your basic frame constructed and raised up on your pedestals, the next step is going to be install 2 additional pieces of timber at both of the ends with spaces in between. The reason for this is when our decking boards are laid up to the end of the deck here, we'll need a section where we can put our picture frame in and screw it off to something. That's why we're putting the spaces in there, so we've got something to screw into. Just remember to pre-drill your holes before you screw your frame together. For your spacing timber, just make sure you fix it in from either side. Now it's time to install our joists across the deck. I'm going to measure and mark their locations to make life easy on myself. Here's a little tip. Make sure you measure all your joist timber, because just because you're buying a certain length of timber doesn't mean it's going to be exactly that length. Normally they cut them a little bit over and you'll need to trim them up at home. Now that you've finished installing your joists into your frame, with 2 large bugle screws into the end of each joist, we're going to work on our fascia board. The fascia board just neatens up and covers the face of the frame timber. We'll be cutting the end of the fascia board with 45-degree cuts so they meet at a 90-degree corner. Now that you've finished installing your fascia board, it's time to start thinking about laying your decking. First though, you might have noticed that I've left one of the fascia boards off one side of the deck, and I'll show you why in a minute. But first, I wanted to introduce you to these little screws that are going to make your life a whole lot easier when you're laying your decking boards. They have a cutting tip, they're self-driving, and they're stainless steel. So no more pre-drilling your holes when you're installing your screws. You'll find these self-drilling screws are a huge time saver on this job. Just make sure you space them about 15mm in from either side of the decking board. Now, before we screw in any of our decking boards, we're going to screw in this first board here, which all the other boards will be butted up against. We're going to use 5mm packers to keep an even spacing around the outside, and these quick release clamps are great while you screw them off. As you're laying your boards, it's important to stop every 5th board to take some measurements on either side of the deck. Just make sure all your spacing is tracking correctly. After we've laid all the decking boards, we're going to come back with a circular saw and trim them all to length in the one go. Gives you a much better finish than having to cut them individually. Just make sure you set your saw depth so it only just passes through the bottom of the decking board. Make sure you leave the last decking board on either end and cut it with the handsaw. You don't want to bring your circular saw too close to your fascia boards. Now that all those boards are cut to length, you just need to cut your framing piece to the correct size and insert it, put the fascia board back on the outside, and we're done with the structure of the deck. Now, in order to avoid the 6 to 8 week weathering process on a Merbau deck, we're going to use some Cabot's U-Deck Prep, which is going to accelerate the process and allow us to coat our deck with oil all in the one day. Now that the prepping process is complete, it's time to move on to the fun part, and that's the decking oil and a lamb's wool applicator. Now the only thing left to do is sit back, relax and enjoy all your hard work.